Hey guys, this is my audition tape. I'd like to play you an original piece, and I hope you like it. Thanks. What is up, guys? So today we're actually back with another deep dive. Today we're actually looking a little bit into a Pokemon that I had really high hopes for going into this deep dive, but after running some numbers, I'm not actually that impressed with it, which is kind of unfortunate. But let's go ahead and get into Kingdra today. So Kingdra is actually a water and dragon type Pokemon, maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board at 2641. Now with a 0-1 attack, 15 defense, and 13 stamina at level 21.5, you can actually hit that 1498, keeping you under that 1500 CP cap, while still giving you a really bulky stat product to actually boot. Now according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have personally ran, Kingdra should rank around 28th in bulk and 27th in stat product, and of course that does come from our base stats here: an attack of 194, a defense of 194 as well, and a stamina of 181 is pretty good. I mean, those stats are not like perfectly spread for PvP, but definitely something we can work with here. Now as far as our moves go, this is kind of where Kingdra gets a little bit interesting. While Kingdra actually carries this water and dragon typing, we do have some very interesting resistances and some things that we can kind of work with, which I think we should kind of build our moves to work with that. So we actually have three choices for our fast move here: Water Gun, Dragon Breath, and our legacy move, Waterfall. Now it's kind of a debate on whether you should be going for Waterfall or Water Gun, and I mean, honestly, I personally think that it really just kind of depends on what you're going for. If you have the legacy Waterfall, by all means, it's a great move and use it. If you want to go with Water Gun, by all means, it's a very standard move and it's got decent numbers here and it'll do just fine. But for me personally, once we get into a little bit of the shields and the matches, I personally think that Waterfall is probably the way to go. Other than a water type move, we do have access to Dragon Breath, which I definitely think is just as good, but I actually ran that for the simulations in this video, and I'm honestly not very impressed with it. So Water Gun here is a 3 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn with a 3.6 after stab, which is pretty good. Dragon Breath at the same energy, which is 3 per turn, for 4 damage per turn, which does bump up to 4.8 after stab, even better. And then Waterfall does fall down to a 2.67 energy per turn, but you're only sacrificing a third of an energy per turn, which isn't too bad. And in turn, you do get that 4 damage or a 4.8 after stab on your water move, which makes it just that much better. Now, in our charge move area, this is where I was just really hoping to just knock this one out of the park, but unfortunately it really doesn't. So we do have Hydro Pump, Blizzard, and Outrage, and we have a couple of stab move options, but I mean, I don't know. It's really awkward. So Hydro Pump costing 75 for 130 damage at a 1.73 damage per energy ratio. After you do get the stab bonus, it does bump up to 156 on the damage for a 2.08 in the damage per energy ratio, so pretty nice there. Blizzard costing 75 for 130 damage at a 1.73, just like Hydro Pump, except this time we do not get the stab. Then we have Outrage costing 60 for 110 damage at a 1.83 damage per energy ratio. After stab though, you do bump up to 132, which becomes a 2.2 on the damage per energy ratio. So good stuff there. That 2.2 on a pretty low cost move compared to our other moves is actually pretty good. So the actual moveset that I go with for this entire video is actually going to be Dragon Breath, Hydro Pump, and Outrage. I did run it both with Blizzard or Hydro Pump as well as Outrage, but either way it didn't really like change much. It literally just kind of shifted some of the matchups around. So with Blizzard we would kill more grass options, but with Hydro Pump we kill more fire options. And then with Dragon Breath, we're pretty much neutral to basically everything. So it just kind of depended on which one you really wanted to go with. It honestly did not change much of the percentages. But I did find with Hydro Pump and Outrage, we do actually put up our best numbers in terms of our shield situations, which we should probably get into here. So in our first shield situation, we actually have this 0 versus 0, which is kind of like a mock-up, like closing type situations. When I don't have any shields, neither does my opponent, Kingdra actually ends up winning 59.8% of the matchups, which is okay. That's not too shabby. Then we actually get into this 2 versus 0, which is where I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any shields. We actually end up winning 97.8% of those. Holy cow, that's great. Now the only thing with this shield scenario is that I'm actually not looking for which Pokemon we actually end up beating. I actually want to know if I have complete shield advantage, which Pokemon still end up beating me. There's only 2. Azumarill and Fortress. So that's actually a pretty good thing that we only have 2 potential threats when we have complete shield advantage. Not that bad. Now when we move on to our 0 versus 2, where I don't have any shields and my opponent actually has 2 shields, we actually win 10.9% of these matchups. And those are actually the ones that I'm worried about, because if my opponent actually has complete shield advantage, I actually want to know which Pokemon I can just always flat out beat. Now there are there's a small theme amongst some of these Pokemon, but it's really just the Pokemon that we take a hardcore resistance to their damage. There's a couple of water in here, there's a couple of fire, there's even a couple of bug and a little bit of electric sprinkled in there, but it's basically the Pokemon that can't really like break down our typing to get through and actually even do neutral damage in a lot of scenarios. So if we are a hardcore resistor to a lot of their damage, then we end up being able to really just output at least enough neutral damage to actually beat them. Then in our last shield scenario here, we do have the 2v2, which is where I have 2 shields, my opponent has 2 shields, or kind of like the mock-up opening type situation. We actually end up winning 75% of those. So, based on what I've been talking about so far, you might be thinking, well, you know, Atticus, those are some pretty good numbers there. I mean, no single digits. We're, you know, in the 70s here, almost in the 60s here. What's wrong? Well, here's the thing. In the 1v1 shield scenario, which is what I ran for the rest of this board, we not only go down, but it's almost the worst possible percentage that we have. In the 1 versus 1, we actually only end up winning 37% of the matchups. So, when I looked at that, I was like, oh man. It's like, that just kills Kingdra for me, because I usually, like, unless I'm just completely back up against the wall, I don't want to have to use both shields on one Pokemon. So that usually means that I only have 1 shield to use for each Pokemon, and then I have to just kind of decide which Pokemon doesn't actually end up getting a shield. So in the 1v1, only winning 37%, that means that we basically cover enough for 1 typing and then a little bit more. But we'll get into that. I'll give some thoughts on that here in just a minute. Let's actually get into our matches and our countering section here, which is actually basically gonna utilize that 1v1 shield scenario. So in all of our deep dives, I end up taking our subject Pokemon, Kingdra, and I put them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the league just to kind of see how they do. So for this, we're actually going to go over to PvPoke, we're going to type in Kingdra, and we're going to just input our moveset here, which like I said, Dragon Breath, Outrage, and Hydro Pump was the moveset that I ended up using. We're going to go with 1 shield. We're actually going to go over to multi-battle. We're going to choose Rainbow Cup. We're going to give them 1 shield. And as you can see, that 37% is pretty abysmal. Now to actually get into the top 10 bulk, I have a custom group set up just called Rainbow Top Bulk. It is actually 15 Pokemon, but that's only because I did give Suicune's top 5 different movesets to kind of like see how good Suicune actually does since he is in the top 10 bulk. So with all these Pokemon, we just hit battle. As you can see here, we do have a pretty good spread. 9 wins and 6 losses. But that actually ends up translating into 4 wins and 6 losses. So here's why. So the Suicune actually ends up being a pretty easy Pokemon to overcome with Kingdra. Hidden Power Water, no big deal. Hidden Power Bug, Ground, and Grass, all no big deal. Even whenever Suicune uses Extra Sensory or Snarl, it still doesn't have the neutral damage to actually end up beating us. So all 5 of those kind of get clumped down into this Suicune win here, which actually ends up meaning that Shuckle, Lapras, Lantern are the only other Pokemon that we actually end up beating out of that top 10. Then we move on to our losses, which as you can see, Mantine is our first loss. Then we have Tentacruel, Jumpluff, Dugong Fortress, and Azumarill. That Azumarill matchup is the hardest matchup for the Kingdra, which unfortunately I still think that Azumarill is going to be one of those Pokemon that everybody's like, oh, I already got that, why wouldn't I use it? You know, it's just one of those like easy picks for them. So with that being said, the top 10 is a little, you know, not in our favor here. We only have a 40% win ratio. But let's actually move over and talk about some countering. So if we want to counter with our Kingdra, what should we actually be focusing our attention on versus what should we really bring to the table to actually combat the Kingdra? Well, as far as countering with the Kingdra, it's actually pretty easy here. So we actually have a fire typing written down there. Once we go down and we type in fire here, you can actually see that fire is a pretty good setup here. We have a lot of wins, and then we only have 3 losses here. Arcanine, Ninetales, and Charizard. Charizard is also one of those Pokemon that I do highly see a lot of people looking at. I think a lot of people are going to be getting onto that Charizard hype train, and they're going to ride it out for a little while. But either way, 3 losses in the fire type is not too shabby. That's actually pretty good. Then let's actually move on to the other typings. So with only 1 typing that we actually hardcore counter, we do have 4 typings that aren't really in our favor. So let's actually look at water. So if we type in water here, you can actually see we have a pretty good setup up top. All these wins are pretty good, but it quickly gets into a lot of losses here. So being said we are dragon and water, we do have a decent resistance to a lot of the water Pokemon. It does look like the ones that we're winning up against are simply just Pokemon that can't really do a whole lot of damage to us. Quillfish, Krabby, Kingler, Vaporeon, not really hitting on a whole lot there. For Alligator, Crocodile, Golduck, nah. Still kind of in that gray area. And then once we start to get closer to these ties, Octillery does actually become a tie. And then we start to lose to all these really awkward Pokemon. Slowbro, Slowking, Corsola, Slowpoke, Blastoise. I mean, so basically what ends up happening is that these Pokemon can actually end up doing a lot more neutral damage to us rather than them. And then we also have some Pokemon like Blastoise that actually have a lot more bulk than we do, so they can just kind of end up outlasting us in the battle. But I mean, generally the water type isn't as clean cut as I thought it was going to be. I actually thought that building this Kingdra as a like neutral damage type Pokemon meant that we could literally just take out a lot of the water types because we'd just be able to do neutral damage. We'd take a ton of resisted damage and then just deal out neutral and we'd be all fine and dandy. But as you can see, it's not clearly that clean cut. So now let's actually get into the grass types, and the grass types are no better. So we do have 1 win with Executor, and then it just starts to go downhill. We actually end up tying against Oddish. Oddish. We tie up against. Parasect is also a tie. Celebi ends up winning, and then you start to see it goes downhill from there. Execute, Tangela, Victory Bell, Venusaur, Ivysaur, all the way down until you get to Meganium, which is our worst possible matchup. Next, let's look into the electric typing here, and here again, it's still kind of rough. It just feels weird that we're not winning too many battles. So Ampharos, Flaffy, Chinchou, Jolteon's a tie. And then we start to lose. So Electrode, Magneton, Magnemite, and as you can see all the way down, Lantern is our worst possible matchup here. Now let's actually look into the bug typing, which I thought, okay, bug typing, we're doing neutral damage for basically neutral damage back, and still, we're not really hitting on a whole lot. Pineco, Butterfree, and Heracross are all wins, and then we tie against the Parasect and the Pinsir, and then the Yanma, and then we start to lose. We just keep losing all these Pokemon, and of course Fortress does end up being our hardest matchup to overcome there. So after I saw all these numbers, I was like, you know, if anybody out there is going to use Kingdra, I think Kingdra should definitely be built more as a specialist in the water section. He does have a lot more wins in the fire typing, which I think is kind of important. No losses whatsoever there, which is great. And then in the other typings like water, isn't that great. We do forfeit a lot of those matches in that setting. But, I mean, we still at least have a specialist towards the fire typing. And then there are a couple of other Pokemon sprinkled in here. As you can see, our electric matchup did actually get a little bit better. We actually win a couple of more than we did beforehand. As you can see in the bug typing, it's not as bad. I just think that with Waterfall, Hydro Pump, and you could probably choose either Blizzard or Outrage in this scenario. One or the other will probably end up being just fine. Outrage may be better just for a little bit better neutral damage to certain things, and considering it's also the fastest of the moves. But Blizzard does actually help you in the grass type matchups, so it's kind of a toss up on which one you want to use there. Like with Blizzard, let's actually see these grasses. Yeah, actually, it doesn't actually help us at all. So, I would say probably Outrage may be better there. I definitely think that Kingdra should be built out to be a water attacking specialist. Even though as a neutral attacker, it does have its place, it basically just beats the fire types very cleanly. And if you're only beating the fire types cleanly, why not just go ahead and be a fire type specialist? It just makes a lot of sense for me personally to go that route. I definitely think that if you go with a water type specialist, you won't be disappointed. If you try to go with the generalist, I think you might end up being more disappointed with the fact that you don't actually win a ton of the key matchups, especially things that are like really bulky, and even some of the top picks already in the month. I think they're probably going to end up having their way with the Kingdra. So if you're interested in the Kingdra, definitely look into a water type specialist build for your team if you don't already have a water specialist there. So that is actually my opinion on Kingdra, guys. I really do appreciate you guys hanging out and watching. Always remember that if you have any ideas for deep dives, please comment down below, as I'll put them in the spreadsheet and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Other than that though, that's actually it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. There's actually 3 videos going live today. But hopefully you guys don't get completely annoyed with all of the content. Hopefully some of it's at least helpful to you. Thank you so much for hanging out. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that. But if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.